In New York City, I'm speaking with historian Lenni Breener. He's author of Zionism in the Age of the Dictators and a number of other books, and authority on Zionist dealings with fascists. We're going to talk about a new book that just come out, The Unspoken Alliance, South Africa's Secret Relationship with Israel by Sasha Polakau-Saransky. Good afternoon.
Yes.
Let's start with the most explosive charge in the book, that in 1975, when South Africa was fully racist, Israeli authorities, led then by Defense Minister Shimon Peres, tried to sell South Africa missiles loaded with atomic bombs. As a historian, do you think Polakau-Saransky makes his case about that?
I think he does. In fact, let me put it this way. As soon as the book came out, Shimon Peres, who is now the president of Israel, nothing less than that, but who was the defense minister in 1975, denounced the book for claiming that Israel offered to sell a Jericho missile with three kinds of warheads, you know, one for gas, one for regular bombs, and one for atomic bombs. And as soon as he made the denunciation, publications like Haaretz, which are, you know, a serious Israeli newspaper, probably the best Israeli newspaper, they said, "Why don't you shut up, Shimon? You know, this is like your recent accusation against Judge Goldstone." Okay? In other words, a couple of weeks before, after the Goldstone UN charges that, you know, the Israelis committed war crimes in Gaza, etc., the Israeli government came out with an accusation that Goldstone had been a judge under the apartheid regime and had ordered executions of blacks, etc. And Haaretz said the same thing. Yeah, he did it, but all you're doing, Israel, is attracting attention to your alliance to Israel.
And to South Africa.
To South Africa, right. And you know, my first skepticism, because I don't care, you know, I mean, I want to see Israel guilty of war crimes, etc., so to speak, politically, but they got to be proved. I don't take anything for granted, you know. Mm-hmm. My first skepticism is, if they didn't make the offer, why did he denounce it? You know, in other words, why did he must have felt that he didn't make that offer, except that they had just made the accusation against Goldstone when it was of no profit to them. All that the accusation did was attract attention to the book, okay? And this is a kind of freakiness that's going on in Zionist circles now, where they're defending themselves by accusing other people of their own crimes and stuff like that. It has a crackpot quality to it that, as a movement begins to lose contact with reality, that kind of thing happens.
And then there's all those documents that
exactly
Polakau-Saransky said of the South Africans, where at least the South Africans thought they were talking about nuclear bombs.
Well, I mean, let me put it this way. He quotes so many documents, and he went, what happened is this. His mother and father had to flee South Africa. They were South African Jews. They had to flee South Africa because she was an anti-apartheid activist.
Now we're talking about the author of
the author.
Okay.
So he actually, I think, was born in the United States. He certainly grew up here, and he's an American citizen. And then he went to Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar, and he got the bright idea of requesting documents from the present South African government, the successor that defeated the apartheid South African government. Now, he says it took him time to get it for bureaucratic reasons, and they did a little teeny tiny bit of editing, you know, and I would attribute that to the fact that they made a deal with, they meaning the apartheid government made a deal with Nelson Mandela and the African National Congress in 1994, where everything was forbidden, and the white South African military, for example, continued on as the generals in the new South African army, etc. So some of these guys might still be around, and to avoid embarrassing South Africans, they edited a little bit, but they didn't edit the stuff on Israel. Okay, so there's no doubt, let me put it this way, nobody's going to do another deep research of the South African files like him, you know, just to prove him wrong on point Z, you know, when he's right on the other 25.
Let's talk a little bit more about his credentials now. He's Jewish.
He's Jewish.
For some people, that's very important.
All right, and not only that, he's not an anti-Zionist per se. Okay, he denounced the United Nations denunciation of Israel as racist in 1975. He calls it infamous. Okay,
Zionism is racist.
Yes.
Equation.
Right. Now, I would even take it a step further than that. One of the things that he did was, once he went through the South African files, he then went to Israel and interviewed some of the Israeli military and politicians who were involved. And frankly, I don't think as many of them would have given him interviews if he was already known as an anti-Zionist. Okay? I got interviews from guys who had collaborated with the Nazis, but I think that they learned something from that. In other words, that, you know, you don't just talk to any old body, etc. I would say this, I don't believe that his Zionism interfered with his digging up the details, okay?
All right.
I think that he doesn't quite understand some of the motivations of the different ideological tendencies within Zionism, okay? Now, he makes it very clear that the alliance with, all right, the way he tells the story, and certainly this part of it is true, is that when Israel was created in 1948, the then South African government was a racist colonial regime, but not the apartheid regime. That came into power a few months later. Then Israel was created in May of '48. That came into power after an election, I think in September or something like that, okay? And at first, Israel, you know, I mean, they thank you for recognizing us, and we recognize you, etc. But Israel's first priority in the 50s was trying to get the support of the newly created Ghana, for example, all right, which had just gotten its independence, and trying to get the UN vote of Ethiopia and Liberia, which were already independent. And then from then on in, step by step, one after another, African country got its independence. So what they tried to do was get their support against the Arabs, against the Palestinians and the Muslims, etc., etc. So they actually sent technical teams, you know, irrigation experts, military experts, etc. Now, originally, these newly independent African countries, they saw Israel as, oh, they revolted against the British. They're like us.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And of course, the poor Jews in the Holocaust, etc. But what began to happen was that after the 1967 war, when Israel conquered not only Gaza and the West Bank, it took Sinai, okay, from Egypt. Now, the newly created Organization of African Union, all of them had to protest the idea of foreigners occupying taking over African territory, okay? So that began the critique of Israel by the African governments. And after that, they sort of split into two camps. The ones who said, hey, Israel is a colonial country, let's not kid ourselves. And some of them who said, we don't care, they got stuff to give us. You know, okay. And what began to happen was that some of these countries like Uganda with Idi Amin and so on and so forth, the Israelis began to provide like the palace guards, if you know what I mean. You know, the train the military of the new despotisms and so on and so forth. Now the Africans, what they, you know, they knew they needed technology, you know, and they didn't want to get it, of course, from Britain and France, okay, and they didn't really want to get it from America, which was tied in, you know, through NATO with Britain and France. So, okay, Israel is still, it's a colonial country, but it's not Britain and France, it's not America. So, you know, we'll do a deal with them. But that began, as I say, in effect, a Egyptian semi-victory, if you know what I mean. And it picked up the anti-colonialism of the Africans.
So it's in the 70s that the Israel-South Africa relationship
really begins. Right.
Now the book, I haven't read the book. I understand it opens up with Prime Minister Foster walking to Yad Vashem, and in 1976.
Yes. Okay.
That opening image.
All right. Now, in other words, the actual, you know, the secret stuff began 73, 74, etc. But by 76, Vorster literally appeared at the Wailing Wall, okay, and then he went to the Yad Vashem. Now, what was shocking more than anything else was him going to the Yad Vashem because Vorster had been pro-Nazi during World War II. See, the Afrikaners had been conquered by the British, okay? So they always felt, hey, this country is really ours. We conquered the natives. You get the hell out of here, Britain. So when Britain went to war against Germany, a lot of Afrikaners supported Germany against their own government, okay? So the idea of Israel bringing Vorster to Yad Vashem was shocking even to Zionist Jews in South Africa because they knew that about their own government, etc. Now, what's important about that is that this was in broad daylight. In other words, when he talks about the when Apollakov Sharansky talks about the Unspoken Alliance, what he means is the secret aspects of the alliance. They literally signed an agreement that everything that they wrote was to be kept secret and that neither one of them had the right to break the treaty. Okay, that, you know, in other words, this is hush up, hush, hush up. Now, the extent of the actual relations were enormous.